in our report, one of the ideas we started off with is that, as every other empire has done, the Chinese civilization will spread out and out and out, and they will actually influence the rest of the world. Our contributors don't think that's going to happen, at least not yet. I still think it will, but it's going to take probably 100 years. What I think is going to happen, though, and this is already starting to happen, is that most places in the world realize that there are multicultures in this world. And in order to be successful in the future, you have to be able to adapt between one culture and another. In the old world, and we're talking just a few years ago, in the old world, it was one culture, essentially. It was the Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian, English culture. Today, you have not only China, you have India, you have Brazil, you have Southern Africa, you have Eastern Europe. All of these cultures are now becoming important. And so I think if you're asking me to look at what is important in the years ahead, it is going to be multiculturalism. And that means not just business. It means politics, it means education, it means every aspect of our life. Main skills. Well, there is a big difference between Chinese companies and companies operating in China. So I'll answer that question in two ways. The Chinese companies are tending to look for Western expertise still in certain very defined areas, in the areas of research, for example, scientific research, medicine, and so on. They don't really quite know what they want. They certainly don't know how to manage people when they get them in a Western way, so it's very, very challenging for the Chinese companies to find Western people. But bit by bit, they are. If you're talking about companies operating inside China who've come from somewhere else, then I suppose the key qualities are this ability to be multicultural and to understand and accept a culture that is totally different from yours, the ability to adapt to that, and the ability to not to lose themselves. I mean, this is one of the interesting things. Having lived and worked in many places myself, it is quite easy to adapt too much. It's quite easy to sink into the local culture to a point where you lose yourself, you lose the reason why you're there in the first place. And so the trick for people coming in from outside is somehow to balance that and to make it possible for you to be you, for you to do the things that you do best, but at the same time be empathetic to the local way of doing things. Well, if the past is any guide, I've lived in many places, as I say, with many different companies who were, first of all, moving outside their own territory and their own environment. And I noticed that the Chinese companies aren't so different. Okay, the cultural background is massively different, but the way in which people go outside is very much the same, and it's very typical. We have a new plant in this country. So we go there, we put in a whole bunch of Chinese managers, we want to do things our way, because that's the way we're used to. But of course the local people want to do things their way. So the Chinese companies have to learn that when you're going to do business in Spain or Portugal or Africa or England, you have to adapt the way in which you do things to that culture. And there are lots and lots of stories. If we had time, I could tell you about that. So I think that's the first thing. The Chinese companies are going to have to adapt. Are they adapting? Yes, but like every other company, they're making the same mistakes. There have been some very interesting examples of Chinese companies that move in, for example, to do a huge project somewhere. And one particular story, this was building a whole series of roads and roundabouts in an Eastern European country. And they put in a bid that was half the price of any of the other bids because they thought they could cut the corners on cost. They were used to doing it at home, so of course they could do it overseas. And what happened was they found, for example, that even though they imported all of their own Chinese laborers into the project, they still had to pay them the minimum wage in that particular country. When the road was being dealt with, they found that there were some frogs or birds or something that were going to be disturbed by this road. So there was a major delay whilst this was being sorted out. So it cost them money, and so on and so on. they didn't know any of these things before they went and took on this project. As a result, it was a failure. They had to pull out, the project failed, bad news for everybody. That kind of experience is going to happen over and over again, as it did when Western companies started to move into China and other places as well. And it's only a question of time. China will learn to be multicultural as well. It's harder for them because they've been so used to being inside their own culture and their own civilization for such a long time. But they will do it.